Jupiter, the giant planet. Jupiter is 500 million miles from the Sun, a giant sphere of intrigue. This churning ball of gas may look like an artist's rendering, but it's the real thing.
Jupiter has the most exotic weather patterns we've ever seen in the solar system.
Jupiter is 84% hydrogen and almost 14% helium, the two lightest and most abundant elements in the universe, rolled into a mammoth mass.
This thing is 11 times the diameter of Earth, and you could take 1,000 Earths and stuff them inside Jupiter comfortably.
Jupiter really is the lord of the solar system. You know, about 70% of the mass in all the planets is in Jupiter. If you're talking about planets, Jupiter is the big boy in the block, and it really does rule the roost.
Jupiter is the largest planet in the solar system, visible to the naked eye. A day is only 9.9 hours long, and it takes 11.86 years to orbit the Sun. A 150-pound person would weigh 350 pounds on Jupiter. There are thunderclouds made of ammonia, sulfur, and water. Exploring Jupiter would be NASA's most daring mission to date. It's a hostile place with temperature extremes from frigid to fiery. Its electromagnetic radiation is intense. It could kill a traveler to the planet in an instant. Jupiter's mysteries aren't limited to the planet itself. Some of its most intriguing elements are circling around it.
Jupiter's got several dozen moons that are big enough to be seen. It's probably got a lot more that are too small to be seen with current technology, and no doubt in coming years more will be discovered.
Some of the moons are almost the size of some planets. So really Jupiter is its own little solar system.
Thanks to its incredible gravitational pull, it sucked in asteroids along with other space debris. For the most part, there is order. Each moon holds its own fascination. 4 of Jupiter's prominent moons were discovered by Galileo. He first observed that they revolved around the planet. They are named for Jupiter, the god's lovers.
The first major moon you come to is Io, which is this very active place with lots of volcanoes. It's almost all the time going off.
Shooting out magma 200 miles into space. Io is a wonder, pockmarked with over 100 volcanoes, some the size of California, which seem to turn themselves on and off. Ganymede is the largest moon in our solar system, 5 times the size of Earth's moon. Callisto is the most heavily cratered. It has clearly taken a beating in its lifetime. Then there's Europa, the ice queen to Jupiter's king. No one knows its makeup for sure.
The magnetic field of Jupiter is the largest entity, I believe, in the solar system.
It is a bubble 450 million miles long, buzzing with electrically charged particles. It's Jupiter's magnetosphere.
The sun's sitting here putting out the solar wind. And the solar wind is charged particles of protons and electrons.
These particles flow along at 1 million miles an hour.
And Jupiter basically captures these protons, electrons, all these charged particles like electrical currents, and it has it then in space circling around Jupiter.
No word in the English language accurately conveys the enormity of this phenomenon.
The magnetosphere of Jupiter is the biggest object in the solar system. It's a lot bigger than the Sun.
Comparisons are the best measure of this mega mighty wonder.
If it were visible in the night sky, it would be many, many times bigger than the moon. It's enormous, even though it's 5 times as far away from Earth as the sun is, it still would look immense in the night sky.
If visible, it would take a familiar form, a windsock. There's a rounded section facing away from the planet in one direction, with a tail flowing out the other. This windsock reaches the outer orbit of Saturn. If there is one planet that represents the majesty, mystery, and awe of the universe, it is Saturn. It stirs emotion even from scientists who are stunned by its cosmic perfection. While it looks sleepy and serene, the 6th planet from the Sun is anything but. Saturn is a dynamo whose beauty is skin deep.
Saturn is an absolutely frigid place. You wouldn't want to step out on the surface. For one reason, you'd fall because there is no surface, but secondly, you'd freeze to death instantly.
Saturn is a hunk of hydrogen and helium that races around its axis, distorting its shape. Even though it's much more massive than our own planet, you'd actually weigh slightly less on Saturn than you do on Earth. A 150-pound human would weigh only 137 pounds on Saturn. That's because Saturn has such a low density, the only planet in the solar system less dense than water.
Saturn is so bloated, the gases take up so much space compared to the total amount of mass in Saturn that its density is less than 1. So if we could get somehow some really big ocean and put Saturn in it, it would float.
Saturn is the 2nd largest planet in our solar system. It is a gas giant, a mass of hydrogen and helium 750 times the size of Earth. A day on the planet is 10.6 hours long, and it takes 29.5 Earth years to orbit the Sun. It has 48 named moons. The feature that has made Saturn the most iconic planet in our solar system is her majestic, shimmering rings. They are incredibly big, 173,000 miles in diameter, wider than 21 Earths side by side. However, these huge rings also are unbelievably thin, measuring about 65 feet. When viewed from the side, they virtually disappear.
They are no thicker than about 1, maybe 2 stories in a modern-day building. They're paper thin in comparison.
The rings may look like perfect solid disks. However, they are actually made up of billions of pieces of space debris. But what exactly are they?
They are countless icy bodies that range in size from objects as big as houses all the way down to the finest powdery snow you might ski on in Utah. And they're made of water ice.
They're particles that have been pulverized, so they've smashed into each other. They've broken up into many, many little particles.
If you were to be inside those rings, it'd be like in a beehive. They're all over the place, so bees in a swarm. It's a hostile place. You do not want to try to put a spacecraft through those rings.
And these particles spin very fast.
And they're screaming around the planet at 20 to 40,000 miles per hour.
The inner rings spin faster than the outer rings. Why the rings are there is one of the planet's great mysteries. The rings might have once been some of Saturn's moons that got too close and smashed into each other. The fractured pieces were held by the planet's gravity to become its rings. According to another theory, something big and fast might have crashed into one of Saturn's many moons. The broken shards were sucked in by gravity and fell into orbit, forming the rings. Although scientists disagree as to how the rings were formed, they do agree as to who first studied them. In 1610, the Florentine astronomer Galileo Galilei first noted the rings of Saturn.
He saw these little things sticking out on the side of the planet. He had no idea what they were. So like any good astronomer, Galileo kept a journal, and he wanted to write into his journal what he had seen, but he didn't have a word for it. So in his journal, right in with the words, he drew in a drawing in place of a noun, and this is what he drew. Here's Saturn, and here's these two things. Unfortunately, Galileo never really figured out what it was. We had to wait for a later astronomer to do that.
45 years later, a Dutch physicist, Christian Huygens, had an answer. He knew that there wasn't just one ring, but several giant rings. Today, there are 7 known ring regions.
There's the A ring, the B ring, and the C ring. So those are the 3 main rings. There is a ring interior to the C ring called the D ring. And once we got there with Voyager, it showed us the F ring in all its glory. And then there are some diffuse rings outside, the E and the G ring.
Each of these rings has a different personality. The A ring is almost transparent, which is why light easily passes through it. The B ring is dense, chock full of material. The C ring is even more transparent than the A, while the D ring is barely there.
There's a lot of neat things in those rings, so you can't think of them as a homogeneous body. You got to think of each particle inside those rings and what each one's doing.
These distinct qualities are what we see as colors, shapes, and shadows, the wonder that is Saturn's rings. For now, visits to Saturn's orbit are reserved for unmanned spacecraft. But surrounding the planet are at least 48 moons. Venturing to one of those is more feasible.